140 feet below the surface of a popular Texas swimming hole, advanced sonar just mapped a massive hidden chamber holding ancient human remains and deliberate markings carved into the stone. The divers who finally reached the bottom of Jacob's Well realized the cave is hiding a secondary hydraulic system that actively pulls people to their deaths. What they filmed in the dark forces us to confront a terrifying reality about what is actually swallowing these swimmers. Join us and let's discover the dark truth at the bottom of Jacob's Well. Let's go.
Number 13. Orda Cave. Temperatures plunging to -40 degrees at the surface obscure the largest underwater gypsum crystal labyrinth on the planet. Hidden beneath the Ural Mountains, this Russian cave system stretches for more than 3 miles in total darkness. The water inside is violently cold, hovering perpetually just above freezing, creating an environment that actively saps body heat through the thickest dry suits. Unlike limestone caverns, the walls here are composed of brilliant white gypsum, a mineral so fragile that a rogue air bubble from a scuba exhaust valve can cause massive sections of the ceiling to collapse. Divers navigating these blindingly white corridors report a terrifying phenomenon unique to this specific mineral composition. The water is so transparent, it creates an optical illusion of open air, causing even veteran explorers to completely lose their sense of up and down. A single wrong kick stirs up microscopic white powder that permanently blinding visibility. Teams who mapped the deepest sections found dead ends that simply vanished into unstable white sand. Finding an exit in a collapsing white void is a biological race against freezing water. The sheer hostility of the freezing water pushed explorers to seek out warmer anomalies elsewhere, leading to a submerged system where the danger came not from cold, but from something entirely alien hiding in the dark.
Number 12. Vortex Spring. A steel grate padlocked at a depth of 115 feet physically blocks humans from entering the final tunnel. Located in Florida, this massive freshwater basin looks peaceful from the diving platform above, but the descent quickly funnels into an increasingly hostile limestone throat. Authorities installed the iron gate and a grim underwater sign depicting the Grim Reaper after the cave claimed multiple lives. The passage beyond the lock narrows so intensely that divers must crawl forward through the silt, pushing their air tanks ahead of them. In 2010, an explorer bypassed the gate and ventured into the restricted zone. Search and recovery teams scoured the tiny, suffocating tunnels for days, expecting to find his equipment trapped in the jagged rock. They found nothing. The cave had entirely swallowed a grown man wearing heavy scuba gear without leaving a single trace. Geologists studying the water pressure noted that the spring produces a powerful outward flow, meaning anything lost inside should theoretically be pushed back toward the surface. The total absence of physical evidence created a nightmare scenario for investigators. If the powerful current did not push him out, something deep inside the restricted zone must have pulled him further down into a space no mapping equipment had ever reached.
Only 1% of people know the dark truth behind what we are about to show you next. If you want to be part of the few who actually know what's happening in the world, subscribe and leave a like right now. Done? Look at this.
Number 11. Cenote Angelita. 100 feet below the jungle surface, a river flows entirely underwater. Deep inside the Yucatan Peninsula, this flooded sinkhole descends into a vertical shaft of crystal water until it hits a dense, toxic cloud rolling like fog over a submerged forest. This apocalyptic landscape is formed by hydrogen sulfide, a highly toxic gas created by decomposing organic matter that separates fresh water above from heavy salt water below.
The gas layer is roughly 10 feet thick and blocks all natural light from penetrating deeper. Passing through this toxic cloud is an assault on the senses. The chemical composition burns exposed skin and completely blinds cameras and flashlights. Divers who pierce through the fog drop into absolute darkness below, surrounded by petrified trees that look like skeletal hands reaching out of the silt. The disorientation caused by the sudden darkness and chemical density triggers massive panic responses in the human brain. Exploring the bottom requires navigating blindly around fallen timber that has been preserved by the toxic environment for thousands of years. The chemical barrier perfectly preserves the darkness, hiding relics from a civilization that viewed these deep pits not as geological formations, but as portals that demanded human payment.
Number 10. Plura Cave. Chainsaws are required to cut through solid surface ice just to reach the entrance of this submerged Arctic nightmare. Located in northern Norway, the water inside sits permanently just above the freezing point of blood. The system runs for miles beneath solid stone and frozen earth, requiring divers to travel on underwater scooters just to survive the transit time. The extreme cold fundamentally alters human physiology, slowing reaction times and increasing the speed of gas consumption. In 2014, 2 divers died deep inside the system when they became wedged in a narrow, razor-sharp restriction at a depth of over 400 feet. The recovery operation was deemed entirely too dangerous by local authorities, officially turning the deep restriction into an icy tomb. A team of civilian friends eventually executed an illegal, highly classified recovery mission, spending hours in freezing water cutting equipment off the remains just to pull them free. The brutal reality of Arctic cave systems forces humans to rely entirely on mechanical life support that inevitably freezes and fails. But the freezing temperatures of the north are not the only environment that turns caves into traps. Sometimes the most lethal hazard is the sheer, incomprehensible scale of the empty space beneath our feet.
Number 9. The shaft sinkhole. A tiny 3-foot hole in the middle of an ordinary Australian farming field drops straight into a subterranean void capable of holding an airliner. Squeezing through the muddy entrance requires lowering equipment on ropes and physically contorting the body to fit past the roots. Once inside, the narrow throat opens into an impossibly massive, pitch-black underwater lake. The water is terrifyingly clear, but the floor is littered with enormous boulders and deep silt beds that drop away into deeper, unmapped fractures. The darkness swallows the strongest dive lights instantly, leaving explorers suspended in a colossal black room with no frame of reference. In the 1970s, a team of 4 divers entered the chamber and became completely disoriented in the vast, featureless water column. They lost the tiny beam of sunlight illuminating the exit and wandered the deep black void until their air cylinders ran completely dry. Recovery teams later found them resting together on the bottom, their equipment perfectly functional but empty. The psychological terror of floating in a massive dark room, unable to find a tiny hole leading back to the surface, completely paralyzes the navigational instincts. The horror of losing the exit in a giant void is terrifying, but other geological structures offer a different kind of terror, pulling explorers straight down into a vertical abyss.
Number 8. Silfra Fissure. The violent separation of 2 continental plates created a jagged scar through Iceland that plunged straight into the Earth's crust. Floating in this freezing crack means swimming directly in the tectonic void between North America and Eurasia. The glacial meltwater feeding the gap takes a century to filter through porous lava rock, resulting in visibility that exceeds 300 feet. The sheer clarity removes the visual friction that normally tells a diver how fast they are sinking. Without a visual reference for depth, the bottom simply looks slightly out of reach. The walls of the fissure are jagged, violent volcanic rock that can tear a dry suit open with a gentle brush, immediately flooding the diver with freezing glacial water.
Sudden tectonic shifts cause massive boulders to detach from the walls, crashing silently into the depths and violently altering the narrow passageways. The crushing water pressure and near-freezing temperatures create a constant risk of equipment freezing open, instantly draining air tanks in a furious burst of bubbles. Swimming between two continents offers unparalleled geological beauty, but the true threat lies entirely in the silent, deceptive clarity. Water this clear masks the true distance to the bottom, a visual trick that becomes instantly lethal when applied to a perfectly vertical blue cylinder in the middle of the ocean.
A massive, perfectly circular ring of sapphire water completely interrupts a shallow Caribbean reef system off the coast of Belize. Dropping into the center reveals a vertical shaft sinking over 400 feet straight down into darkness. At roughly 130 feet, the vertical walls suddenly fall away, revealing massive overhangs populated by stalactites the size of city buses. These ancient rock formations prove the entire structure was once a dry cave during the last ice age, before the ocean collapsed the roof and flooded the interior. The danger here lies in a massive biological dead zone. Deep inside the hole, a thick layer of toxic hydrogen sulfide completely blocks oxygen from reaching the bottom. Anything that sinks past this chemical barrier dies and is perfectly preserved in the anoxic environment. Submersibles exploring the absolute bottom found a barren, alien landscape littered with the shells of trapped marine life and the unrecovered equipment of lost divers. The complete lack of oxygen and the crushing pressure create an environment that actively stops the biological clock. The deep ocean hides its dead perfectly, but moving inland reveals submerged labyrinths where the water hides ancient secrets deeply embedded in the walls.
Number 6. Sistema Sac Acton. More than 200 miles of flooded tunnels twist like a massive circulatory system beneath the Mexican jungle. This labyrinth is so extensive that mapping it took decades of blind exploration through delicate limestone restrictions. The passageways constantly split, merge, and spiral into different levels, creating the most complex navigational puzzle on Earth. A broken guideline here means wandering completely blind through identical white limestone corridors until the air runs out. Deep inside this sprawling maze, explorers documented a massive submerged pit dubbed the Black Hole. The floor of this deep chamber was covered in something completely unexpected. Amidst the white rock, they found the perfectly preserved remains of extinct megafauna, including giant sloths and saber-toothed cats, resting alongside a human skeleton dating back over 13,000 years. The positioning of the remains indicated that animals and humans had fallen into the pit when it was dry and could not escape the dark vertical shaft. The cave had silently kept their desperate final moments sealed in water for millennia. Discovering prehistoric remains fundamentally changed how scientists viewed these underground networks. The tunnels were not just geological features, they were ancient, flooded tombs guarding mysteries that demanded specialized robotics to reach.
Number 5. Zacaton Sinkhole. Floating islands of solid grass and earth drift slowly across the surface of an impossibly deep crater in northeastern Mexico. This geothermal sinkhole descends into a thermal abyss so deep that human divers have never successfully reached the bottom. The water is heavily mineralized and stinks of sulfur, heated by deep volcanic vents hidden miles below. In the 1990s, a pioneer of deep cave diving attempted to find the floor, descending past 900 feet. The immense water pressure at that depth caused severe neurological toxicity, fatally shutting down his central nervous system before he could reach his target. To finish the map, NASA deployed a specialized robotic submarine designed for exploring oceans on Jupiter's moons. The robot descended past 1,000 feet, mapping a massive underwater mountain range completely hidden inside the crater.
The sheer scale of the cavern proved that geothermal forces are carving out hollow spaces in the Earth's crust massive enough to swallow skyscrapers. The sheer pressure at these depths breaks human physiology long before equipment fails. Pushing the limits of depth requires perfect calculation, but some caves actively induce a chemical intoxication that makes divers willingly swim to their own deaths.
A massive, water-filled fracture cuts deeply into the arid landscape of the Northern Cape in South Africa. The descent requires divers to drop through a narrow, dark crack that suddenly opens into an impossibly large vertical chamber stretching down over 900 feet. The depth here is so extreme that breathing normal air becomes instantly lethal due to oxygen toxicity. Divers must breathe complex, custom-mixed gases just to keep their nervous systems functioning. At these depths, the immense pressure triggers nitrogen narcosis, a biological response that acts like severe intoxication. Divers report feeling euphoric, confused, and suddenly indifferent to survival. In 1994, a young diver lost control of his buoyancy and plummeted to the bottom. 10 years later, an extreme depth specialist found his remains resting perfectly preserved in the silt. The recovery attempt pushed the absolute boundaries of human physiology, requiring 12 hours of slow decompression just to return to the surface safely. The intense pressure and total darkness of extreme depth create an environment where the mind itself becomes the greatest enemy. But while depth creates biological confusion, the true apex of cave diving danger comes from structures that actively trap and deceive the eye.
A seemingly tranquil coral pool on the coast of the Red Sea completely conceals an underwater tunnel known simply as the Arch. Dropping straight down from the shore, the vertical wall descends past 170 feet before a massive opening appears in the reef, leading out to the open ocean. The Arch is intensely deceptive. From the inside, the glowing blue light of the ocean looks like a short, easy swim. In reality, the tunnel is nearly 90 feet long and angled slightly downward. Divers intoxicated by depth and mesmerized by the blue light swim into the tunnel and quickly realize the current is pushing against them. The intense physical exertion at extreme depth rapidly burns through their air supply. The ocean floor directly beneath the Arch is a graveyard of lost equipment and shattered tanks. A silent monument to hundreds of people who misjudged the optical illusion. The psychological pull of the glowing blue exit makes rational people abandon their training and swim directly into a physiological trap. The sea relies on visual deception to trap explorers, but freshwater springs use a far more brutal tactic, luring divers with stunning clarity before unleashing a violent, churning trap.
A stagnant pond hidden deep in the Florida swamplands completely conceals a labyrinth known as the Mount Everest of cave diving. The entrance forces divers to slide through an intensely narrow rock chimney, dropping vertically until they emerge into a colossal subterranean room known as the main mount. The water clarity is dangerously perfect, creating the illusion that the distant rock walls are much closer than they actually are. The extreme distances require divers to swim hard just to cross a single room, drastically increasing carbon dioxide buildup in their blood. The cave system is a massive network of deep interconnecting tubes that trap silt in thick banks along the floor. A single clumsy fin kick causes the fine powder to explode upward, instantaneously reducing visibility to absolute zero. The massive scale of the rooms means that once the silt cloud blooms, finding the guideline is mathematically impossible. You are suspended in cold, suffocating mud, entirely blind, hundreds of feet below a swamp. The sheer size of the rooms creates a false sense of security that vanishes the moment the water turns against you. Yet there is one spring that weaponizes water itself, turning the very currents into an active, aggressive predator. Number 1. Jacob's Well. A perfectly circular, 12-foot opening carved into the limestone of the Texas Hill Country descends into a blue-green darkness that has swallowed 8 people alive. For decades, officials blamed the fatalities on standard equipment failure and poor visibility. But the divers who survived reported something terrifying. Deep inside the twisting limestone throat, the water was actively working against them. The outward flow of the spring would suddenly and violently reverse, creating a massive suction that physically dragged divers deeper into the pitch-black tunnels. In 2023, a highly specialized expedition finally pushed past the lethal restrictions to map the true bottom. 140 feet down, their sonar detected a colossal hidden chamber that geology said should not exist. The floor was completely covered in a deep, ancient sediment, hiding a secondary conduit network violently pumping lateral currents. The cameras recorded human bones resting on the floor, ancient remains resting in a chamber that had been completely dry thousands of years ago. The walls surrounding the skeletons were covered in deliberate carved markings. Someone had known about this deep abyss when it was dry, leaving their dead and their symbols in the dark. The spring is an ancient tomb, actively hiding a violent current that pulls the unwary straight down into the ancient dark.
If you thought this was terrifying, you are not ready for what they found in the video on your screen. Click it right now. The truth is worse than you think.